Hey, this is Ken from Coffee Crafters, and we thought we'd do a quick video on doing your first roast on the Valenta 3. We have this one set up, it's a deluxe model, but the base model and the deluxe model, the roasting part is exactly the same. The deluxe model has a really quiet blower back here and cyclone and some of the other things, but as far as roasting, it's totally the same. So, before we get started, I want to go over a couple of things. One of the things with all of the Valenta line of roasters is you want to make sure that your exhaust blower is running before you start roasting, loading beans, doing anything. And also you have to establish the loft air before you put the beans in, especially if you're doing back-to-back roasts and you know, you're loading your second load on a hot machine. If it sits there for 30 seconds without the loft going, it will burn the beans. If you let it sit longer, it will start a fire. So that's one of the things that we're going to practice a little bit. We're going to start our exhaust blower, and then I have the light on in here. So the nice thing about the Valenta 3 is you can see everything going on inside of there, which is kind of cool. And we're going to do a 1 pound load today. I think it's a good place to start. And we're going to practice lofting and seeing where the loft settings are. So one of the things that you should do when you're doing your first roast is start collecting some information. Some of that information is, where is my loft setting on my 1 pound load? And then you want to put in a 3 pound load. Do that on a cold machine so you get used to establishing where that loft is going to be. One of the things that was hard for us to get used to on this roaster, the loft is so efficient. There's only like a half a notch of difference on a scale of 1 to 10 between lofting a 1 pound load and a 3 pound load. On the Artisan series, you know, it took way more air, you know, to loft the larger loads, but this is really efficient. I'm going to show you what we're going to do here. So I have my 1 pound of beans ready to go. So I'll turn on machine. So on the deluxe model, when you turn on the system power switch, it turns on the exhaust blower for you. So you don't have to do that. If you have the base model, it'll be different. You have to turn your blower on outside of that. What we're going to do for our 1 pound load is we're going to set the loft on 3. Now this is where we set it here with our voltage. You're going to want to test that to see if that's where your loft is. So let's go ahead and dump these beans in. So it's nice to dump the beans in here. You'll just leave your dump chute on here. You don't have to take it off between loads. When you dump the beans in and it's already exhausting, all the dust off the beans go out into the cyclone. So with us, in our application, and hopefully it'll work for yours the same, I'm going to use a loft setting of 3. I have it set on 3 here. A roast temperature setting of 6. And then I can just turn it on. So we kind of wanted to establish those 2 settings, loft setting of 3, heat setting of 6, so you can do your entire first roast without having to touch anything, and it will allow you to look at it, see what's going on. So as you see here, that's where our loft is on a setting of 3. I could turn it down even more than that. Halfway through, I could turn it down to 2.5 if I wanted a low loft. You can use the loft on this machine, just like all of our other roasters, to increase or decrease heat. Now we're going to be roasting at a lower temperature than we're used to on the Artisan roasters. If you look at how the beans are going around here, that's also how the hot air is circulating in there. If you've seen some of our other videos on the roast chamber, it creates a vortex of hot air in there. So you see that on the Artisan series roasters, the beans came in contact with the hot air stream. And this is true for any conical hopper where it has a direct vent, because once that hot air stream leaves the beans, it evacuates the machine. That doesn't happen in these. So you can see the beans are constantly immersed in the hot air. And it's one of the reasons why we can roast faster at a lower temperature. So You can actually do a 6-minute roast on this machine if you wanted to, and the beans turn out fine. When we were cupping those, it was hard for us to get used to because we were used to that 8 to 12-minute roast window. This one's more like 6 to 10 minutes. So we're gonna leave it on those settings. We're gonna go through that. If you are doing your first 3-pound load, you can have on our machine, just turn it up to 10, all the way up with a loft setting of 3.5 instead of 3. So between that 1-pound load and the 3-pound load, it's only a half a notch of difference. And even then, we can turn down the loft once it gets about 2 minutes into the roast. One of the things you'll notice on these, the only critical time on the roast where if you're doing a low loft, you need to watch it a little closer, is the first 2 minutes of the roast. After that, the hot air, the way that it flows, it keeps the beans moving, and you can turn the loft down quite a bit. So this is actually a fairly high loft. That's not where I usually would loft the beans. I would usually turn it down a little bit more. I could go down to 2.5, and that's a low loft. For this roast though, I'm gonna leave it on 3. And we've modified from our original prototype, we've modified the cyclone, so it's much more efficient. And actually, Bryce, you can insert in this video the simulation that we had, that Chris had on the new cyclone, and it is awesome. It catches so much more than our first prototypes did, and we tweaked it in the simulator until it got just what we wanted for extraction, and then actually built one, and it worked fantastic. So being able to prototype your own parts, we could build a new cyclone in a day and then test it the next day. We have prototype parts of the ones in our boneyard laying everywhere. Actually, Bryce, there's a couple of them down here that didn't quite work like we wanted. And so those goes into the recycle bin, and then we got the good one back here. So the difference between the base Model 2, you're gonna have a different hood on here. So one of the nice things with these roasters is we're connecting both from here to the cyclone and from here to your exhaust blower on the base model, right off the back of the hood. And it makes it much more efficient than having the mast that we used to have where the air would travel up there. We have a huge bin of used recycled duct fittings, so you'll see a lot of tape and stuff on here. This isn't the cleanest of installations, but we pull the stuff out of our big bin and keep reusing it when we're testing. We do recommend using rigid ducting for everything on this roaster. The exhaust blower is really efficient, but it's only 388 CFM. So if you have a long run or you use a long run of flex ducting and you lose that 20 to 30% of efficiency with some stretched out flex that's not tight, it will not work on this roaster. So we have a really nice diagram in the manual on how the duct goes together. It comes with almost all the ducting you need, I think, all the way to the cyclone. The only thing you have to do is the discharge on the deluxe model, the discharge of the exhaust blower to the outside. That's the part that the customer supplies. If you have a base model roaster like this, it will have a recommendation of the same size of blowers we used on the Artisan 3E, and it will have plenty of suction. So you can use some flex ducting on that. In fact, it'll come with some flex ducting in your kit. But this one's a little bit different. It's about 12 decibels quieter than our other blowers. More than that on the Valenta 15 blower. It was running about 72 decibels. This is running about 58 decibels, which is actually a big deal. So one thing I noticed when I was testing is Chris was going to come out and work with me on something. He was only a couple of rows away in the factory. I was over here roasting and he couldn't hear it. And before we could hear it from his office when I was roasting, so it was a little bit noisier. One of the cool features in here is that roast chamber. To clean it, one of the things with the other roasters is the roast chambers were bolted down. It mounted over studs, nuts are on the top. You got to take those off to clean it. On this guy, We made the front panel, so you just take this off. You don't have to take anything else apart. Take the top of the roaster out and take the side panel out. So, but you don't have to fully disassemble the inside. It just has two buckles. It just buckles down. Pull it out for cleaning, put it back in. It cut the cleaning time at about half, and it was mostly for assembly and disassembly time. So it's real easy to keep it clean. This roaster is really easy to work on. So on the side of the roaster over here, there's a door to access the heat element and the loft motor. This roaster also preheats the air in here. So this door has holes in it. Those holes are what we use to regulate the intake air temperature, because it's sucking intake air through this hot void in here. And so, but we had to add intake air to mix with that air to make sure that we didn't get over 110 degrees on the intake air, which it didn't. But that also boosted the performance because it preheats the air in there. All right, we're almost at first crack here. I know somebody's gonna ask, can they roast more than 3 pounds in here? Yes, I have. I boosted it to 3.5 pounds. So on a hot machine, there's no reason you can't do that. When you roast it and fill it up though, it does fill this thing up. So you gotta be careful, but it roasted fine. This has a lot of throttle to spare. We're roasting on manual here. We're not using the Prometheus. We're gonna do a full video series of roasting with the Prometheus so you can see what it does. It really runs a nice tight graph on here when you're doing the roast profiling. Those of you who have watched my videos for a while know that I was not the biggest fan of roast profiling, but I have to tell you, when we did the Valenta series roaster, because you don't have to sit here and babysit the loft as much as you did on the Artisan series of roaster, it adds to productivity, because a lot of you roasters out there are going to start businesses where you have to do everything. And I am not uncomfortable with setting the Prometheus, let it handle the heat, establish my loft, and do something else for 5 or 6 minutes while the roast is going on. And I'm totally comfortable being in the area, but if I'm working on a table over here packaging beans or something, that's totally fine. That Prometheus does a great job of running it to its roast profile. It'll turn down the heat for you, and yeah, it works great. The bean cooler, one of the things we did differently, this looks a lot different than the 3E bean cooler body. This is something that we took advantage of our airflow simulator in SolidWorks. This is actually a printed part over here, and the reason we did that is we simulated an intake manifold that would allow us to have the equal suction all the way across in there. We have a really good seal when we put in this into that. When you open this, I was cooling dark roast to 470 degrees with this in 70 seconds. It took it down to where it was below 100 degrees. I could take it out. It made a huge difference. So it cools in about half the time of the Artisan 3 bean cooler. And the cool thing is, with the new printed material, this stuff's rated at 500 degrees. So we measured our intake air temperature, and it spiked up to like 290 or so on the intake air on a full load of dark roast. So it almost gave us that 100% over rating on this material. And printing it gives us such a huge advantage, because to make an injection mold for this, it would have been really expensive. And so probably about $12,000 for the mold for that. And making the mold the first time, you don't know if it's going to work or not. So it allowed us to tweak this, do it over and over again, make it more stable, and then we just print them. So we have a 3D printing room in there, and we're finding lots of really good uses for that 3D printer. We use the same material in this window well right here. That is actually this same high temperature printed material. Okay, so we're going to come up on my dump temperature here shortly. I'm going to turn that just down a little bit just to speed it up to the end. You could leave it there for the whole time. So what I did on a cold start with this, it took the roast out to about 10 minutes, which is far longer than you really needed to. That was with an air setting of 3, a heat setting of 6. If you turn that down, you'll have to turn the heat down on your subsequent roast once you get used to it, because it'll be too fast. The first time I roasted on this, I was still trying to get used to those heat settings. My first roast was like 3.5 minutes, and it was so much more efficient than I was used to. I had to keep turning it down, turning it down, turning it down. All right, so I'm gonna dump these beans about 430 degrees. That's where I like this particular bean that's in there. So we're gonna open the blast gate. So we have that running. Now, one of the things I'm gonna do when I dump this, I'm gonna open the gate, but I'm gonna turn the loft down while I'm dumping it. There we go. Now I immediately turn that loft back up, because if I'm going to do another load, I could dump it in right now. So you can see that process, there's no reason to take longer than 10 seconds to do that. And then it'll roast and cool at the same time, no problem. You're not going to lose any chaff off the top. So, yeah. So anyway, that's the way to do the first roast. I still today, just out of habit, when I'm done roasting for the day, I'm going to turn off the heat, and I leave my loft running while the beans are cooling. I let my machine cool down to where the roast air temperature gets down below 300, and then turn it off. It's just kind of a good habit to get into. If you turn it off right away, I don't think it would hurt anything. I've done that since the very first roasters that weren't insulated as well as these. Yeah, the insulation's really nice on these. So we're using a good auto grade. It's a thin material, but it really, really made a big difference. So this entire roaster body outside of the roast chamber is all aluminum. It's really lightweight. And we use that aluminum for both extracting heat and also retaining heat in the right places in here. We're harvesting that heat to heat the air, and yeah. So there, we're below 300 degrees. I'm gonna turn that off. So that was our first roast. We're gonna have more videos coming on using Prometheus, different load sizes, some tricks that we've seen using it, but hopefully that'll get you started, and thanks for watching.